Perkins, who I'm so pleased to have with us. So let me just introduce you, John, and if you want to say something else later on, do so. But John Perkins is the author of 10 books and an internationally acclaimed activist who founded, amongst other things, the Pachamama Alliance. Well, he co-founded it, and he received the Lennon Ono Peace Prize. So John's 10 books on global intrigue and economic shamanism and transformation, including Touching the Chakra, Shape Shifting, and of course the very classical Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And they have all been on the New York Times bestseller list for more than 70 weeks, sold over 2 million copies, and are published in 37 languages. So he was a chief economist at a major consulting firm and advised the World Bank, United Nations, Fortune 500 corporations, the US, and other governments in his previous life, which is part of this life. He has been initiated as a shaman in the Amazon and Andes and has lectured at Harvard, Oxford, and more than 50 other universities, as well as at economic forums and shamanic gatherings around the world. As I said before, he's the founder and co-founder and board member of Pachamama Alliance, Stream Change, and received a Peace Prize. So this is John, and John will be talking about dreaming a new reality for an emerging world. But before we go into that, can you just talk a bit, and I think you have done that a lot over the years, about your journey from being an economic hitman and being on the world stage in a way, in that capacity, not as a hitman, but in the capacity as an economic expert, to shaman. So how did that journey actually come about?
Well, thank you, Krista. It actually was the other way around to start with. I was a Peace Corps volunteer deep in the Amazon rainforest with the Shuar people, hunters and gatherers, back in 1968 to 71. And a shaman saved my life. And that's another story I can tell if you're interested. But as a result of that, he demanded that I become his apprentice. Now, this is 1969. I had never even heard of shaman. I had graduated from business school. I had no interest in shamanism. There was no future in it in those days whatsoever. But the guy saved my life. So I became his apprentice. And it was a phenomenal experience, actually. And then after I got out of the Peace Corps, I did what I'd been taught to do in business school, and I became chief economist at this international consulting firm, which, my actual job we refer to as an economic hitman. And again, I can go into more detail if you like. But it was a job I believed in for the first 7 years or so. And then I began to understand that what I was doing was selling the world and myself a lie. Got out after 10 years, and then eventually went back to the Amazon and back to shamanism, went back and talked to the Shuar people who I'd been living with and said, I know your rainforests are under threat. They're being destroyed, and I'm here to help. I want to do whatever I can to help you. In a way, it was, I was trying to make amends for what I had done as an economic hitman and use what I'd learned in that capacity to turn things around, to move from what we call the death economy that's consuming and polluting itself towards self-destruction into a life economy, which pays people to and is an economic system that supports long-term benefits to all life. And that's very much the kind of economy that indigenous people have had throughout the hundreds of thousands of years that we've been around and continue to have in places like the Amazon. So I go back and say, I want to help you guys save your rainforest. And they say, well, if you want to do that, then it's going to require changing the dream of your people. We aren't destroying the rainforest. It's not even your oil companies and mining companies. They're the immediate destruction, but the real destruction is the dream of people who demand oil and the minerals that come from mining. So help change the dream of your people. And that's when he came back and founded a nonprofit called Dream Change, and later co-founded the Pachamama Alliance, and have devoted the rest of my life to trying to change that, writing these books. And incidentally, there's 11 now, including the most recent Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which goes into China's role in all of this. So that, in a nutshell, is the story.
Okay, really in a nutshell, because it's a long road you traveled here so far, nah? And so you said change the dream, and that brings me in a way to my next question. What do you see as the dream of the current paradigm is actually? What is the dream, and why do we need to change it?
Well, it's a dream that's based on extreme materialistic consumption and satisfying that for ourselves as individuals, and for the corporations that really run the world to a large degree. It's maximizing short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And it's a dream that we all buy into, pretty much. We all buy from these corporations, or most all of us do, and we work for them, or we invest in them. We support them, and it's this goal that really has created this economic system that is destroying itself. And, we think of climate change as a problem, income inequality as a problem, and species extinction. Those are problems, but they're not the problem. The problem is this death economy. All of these other problems result from our belief in this extreme form of materialism. And that's a fairly recent phenomenon in human history. And, it started maybe a couple of thousand years ago. But when you consider that we're 200,000 plus years old as a species, that's a blink of time. So we really are a species that comes from a belief in the life economy, an economic system that's sustainable, that's recyclable, that doesn't produce trash, that regenerates the same environments that it destroys. Our ancestors all did that. And indigenous people in places like the Amazon continue to live that kind of life and want us to understand the importance of it.
I mean, with the death economy, let's just go a little bit deeper, because I think to really characterize that, John, it is an economy which is based on that everything needs to die so that we can produce more and consume more. Yeah, if we just look at phones, yeah, my phone has to die within a year or two so that I buy a new one. So everything has to die. That's the idea behind the death economy, so that we consume more, that we progress, well, so-called progress, that we continue. Is that the idea behind it?
Well, that's part of the idea. But it's also the idea that, if I don't wear this shirt, I won't be successful. The whole propaganda campaign of you got to read all these books. You look around, I look behind you, you've got a lot of materialistic things. I'm not criticizing you. We all live that. And we've adapted this belief system, uh, or adopted this belief system that more is better. And even many of us who know philosophically that that's not true, we continue to drive cars, we continue to fly off in air. I was just in the Amazon 2 weeks ago, and I took a group of 18 people to hang out with these, the Shwa and the Achwa, these hunters gatherers who are teaching us amazing things. But to get there, we had to burn a lot of jet fuel. And, we all participate in one way or another, and we justify this by various means. But it's really about a tremendous amount of consumption. And yes, you're right. It's also about, planned obsolescence, if you will, that we have to rebuy. Or, well, I finished this book, so I got to buy another book. And I'm a writer, so I'm certainly not criticizing books, but it's part of this whole cycle of that we have to keep buying more and more things.
We are all caught up in it, as you say. We are caught up in it, and we need
Yeah,
to make a conscious effort. But then it, and I also think we have adopted almost that we are only worth something if we have more and more.
true.
So it goes very,
That's
very deep by now, doesn't it?
yeah. Yeah, I got to have this shirt or I'm not worth anything. You know, I'm this hyperbole, but that kind of idea that I've got to have a new car, I've got to have the latest cell phone. You know, I've got a 10, I need to have a 14 or whatever the latest one happens to be, or I'm no good. And yeah, and the life economy now, that's the opposite. That's an economic system that's based on a goal of maximizing long-term benefits for all life, all life. And it doesn't mean we don't grow. You know, people say, well, we've got to stop growth. Well, no, we have to stop the kind of growth that we've been having, but we need to grow systems that clean up pollution. We need to pay people to figure out how to mine all the plastic that's floating out around in the oceans and recycle it. Pay people to replant forests. Pay people to rejuvenate destroyed mine pits in other areas. Pay people to create new forms of energy that don't rely on fossil fuels, that maybe just draw out of the air or water. So there's all kinds of incredible things that we can do in the future. I'm not talking about going back and living in caves, but I am talking about having an economic system that benefits life rather than destroying it. You know, tell starving people around the world and malnutrition people around the world that we don't need growth. Well, they need growth. They need growth in food supply, and that's something we can provide. And it's something we in the countries that we people who aren't starving or nutrients starved, nutrition starved, something we can cycle into doing that instead of creating more baubles, bigger cars, better cell phones, etc. Let's create things that really support life on this planet, and there's a lot we can do in that regard.
Okay, so this is in a way, we're talking two levels right now. Now, you're talking, this is what needs to happen on this level. But what also needs to happen, of course, for this to happen on this level is a change in consciousness, doesn't it?
It is,
You
yes.
call the dream needs to change. You talk a bit more about that? 'Cause that's what,
Well, yes, it's all about the idea that perception molds reality. And that's something that the shaman taught me back in 1969. You know, that so what was I was dying in the Amazon, but when I went on the shamanic journey, what I saw was I couldn't keep any food down, it was I was resigned to dying deep in the Amazon. I couldn't stand up, I couldn't walk. It was a very difficult journey to get out of where I was. There was no way I could do it. And this shaman offered to heal me. And what happened during that healing process is that I saw that every time I ate the kind of food that they have, and they ate some very strange foods, in my opinion, at that time, things like squirming white grubs that you pull out of a rotten log. That was a delicacy. And in the Amazon, most people don't drink water from the rivers because they know the rivers are polluted with organic matter, dead animals, dead foliage, etc. They make a kind of beer called chicha by the women chewing and spitting manioc root, sets up a fermentation process. You then can add water to it and drink it because you get strong alcohol. So I'm drinking a lot of spit beer and eating a lot of squirming white grubs and other things. And I realized when I'm on this shamanic journey that every time I did this, I heard a voice like my mother saying, "It'll kill you. It'll kill you." And at the same time, I saw how incredibly robust and healthy the Schwa people were. They ate these foods, and they were, some of them lived to be very old if they didn't die in a hunting accident or a canoe tipping over and drowning them or something. Um, and so that night, I realized that it wasn't the food and drink killing me; it was my perception. And when the shaman asked me to become his apprentice, the first thing he taught me was it's all about perception. And we know now that that's true. That's the basis of modern psychotherapy. It's the basis of quantum physics. It's the basis of marketing. It's the basis of politics. You know, if we there are no corporations. There's no demand for any goods except as we perceive them. And when enough people are convinced to perceive something some way, they take actions, they pass laws, they buy things, they do things, and that has a huge impact on reality. And as an economic hitman, that's also what I practiced. I was selling a perception to countries that had resources our corporations wanted, that they need to involve the United States in making huge investments in infrastructure projects, et cetera. And that would help the economy grow. It was a perception that I was selling. And I think what's important for us to recognize now, Krista, is this shamanic concept of perception molding reality is our hope for the future. That yes, it's all about consciousness, which is perception, right? I mean, the two go together. So we are having a consciousness revolution on this planet right now. I think people are waking up. You know, I have the good fortune of speaking at events in many different countries all over the world. And everywhere I go, you know, people like questions you're asking. People are tuning in, like all the people tuning in here today, because they understand that times have changed. We've reached a huge crisis point on this planet, and we've created it through our perceptions and the actions we take to satisfy those perceptions, to respond to those perceptions. And that creates a reality which is destroying us and the world as we know it. We're in the process of doing that. But it's all a perception. And all we need to do,
That
all we need to do, it's a big all, but all we need to do is change our perception.
it
And
is a
that,
big point because it needs to be, of course, happening on a relatively grand scale. Or
yeah, but you know, there's this idea of critical mass, and I believe in it. It doesn't take all the people to buy into a new perception. It just takes them people that we identify as kind of the leaders, you know, and we've seen that happen. We're seeing it happen now. We've seen a huge increase in solar energy and wind energy and electric cars. And, you know, let's face it, in the United States right now, we're having a bit of a setback with this new administration, but that's a setback. But I actually think in the long run, that'll probably maybe this is just wishful thinking, but I do believe that that's a setback. That the curve is going upward to being more conscious of what it takes to create a life economy. And right now we've had a little setback, but often these setbacks are what ultimately drives us to a higher level. And that's my hope at this point in time. And I'm devoting my writings and teachings these days whenever I have the opportunity to spread that spread that hope.
yeah. Funnily enough, it's mine as well, because otherwise I might as well just stop with everything. My hope
Yes.
as well, you know, that yes, it is a setback and yet it is horrendous to watch, but it sometimes these things really push something else forward, don't they? I mean, it was in after the Second World War, you know, having fascists rule part of Europe and having the Second World War. But what happened afterwards was a real step up. It was a real step up on so many levels. No? But yes,
Yes.
went through 6 years of hell beforehand. So yeah, let's hope that this is a similar idea, not with a war, but that it can push things a level up. Yeah, that a
And I
shift.
think if people look at this on an individual level, everybody that's listening to this program now would be able to identify times in life that seemed like a setback that actually pushed them forward. I would mention, you know, I would never have gotten interested in shamanism if I hadn't been dying in the Amazon. It was a miserable, I mean, I was scared. And actually, by the time the shaman came along, I'd given up being scared. I just resigned that I'm going to die. And, but out of that came a whole change in my life. And And I can name a number of times in my life that something like that has happened, and I think probably every listener can also do that.
Yeah, individually and collectively, no?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'm so this idea of the dream, and you said when we spoke that we might go into, so how can we bring that new dream in, individually and collectively? Because we are quite, we have been taken in, all of us. There's no
Mhm.
exception, you know. I don't take myself out, and I don't take you out either of it. You know,
No.
we all have been really, really taken in by this current dream that this is the only one. You know, or that this is, and that we make small sacrifices. But what? How can we change that dream more profoundly so that's really profound for us?
Yes, I think, well, I suggest that people ask themselves 5 questions, and I can go into those if you'd like.
Yes, please go for it.
But to start with, as you pointed out, we all know, we're burning, we use too much gasoline in our cars. We don't really need all these clothes that we have or whatever it is we have. Um, but that some of that I think is a very much of a distraction
Mm.
from the fact that in a way these little things they matter. But what really matters is the big issue, what the big corporations are doing, because we're collaborating with the big corporations. And we are buying into this idea that our dream has to be one that coincides with this overall perception of society of extreme materialism. So, so it's important that we do the little things, cut back on fossil fuels, et cetera. But it's even more important that we look beyond that. And so these questions are oriented toward that. And the first question that I would ask everybody to ask themselves frequently is, what do I most want to do for the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest bliss, the greatest satisfaction? Because if we don't do that, we're not going to be successful. We may make money, but we're not going to be. I made a lot of money as an economic hitman, but in the end, I discovered that it was destroying me. That I was becoming an alcoholic and addicted to Valium. I was not happy. So, what do we most want to do for the rest of our lives? And I answer that question by saying I want to write because I love to write. I constantly write. I love to write. And I have a friend who's at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a carpenter. He says, I want to work with my hands in wood. So the second question then is, how do I do this in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy? And my answer to that would be, I'm going to write things that inspire people to get involved in doing exactly that. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I'm only going to use sustainable materials. And I'll pay to have trees replanted for every tree that my wood consumes. And so the third question is, what is stopping me from doing that? What's blocking me? What perception, like my perception that the food and drink were killing me, what perception is holding us back? And I could say as a writer, well, I know that to be a successful writer, I have to write for at least 2 hours a day, and I just don't have the time. And my carpenter friend would say, well, my clients, I don't want to pay the extra price to have me plant trees or to use sustainable woods. And so the fourth question is, when we confront that perception, now the people in the Amazon say that when we have a perception that blocks us, it's a jaguar standing in our path. And this is where the term of one of my more recent books, Touching the Jaguar, comes from. There's a jaguar stopping me from moving forward. And if I run from that jaguar, it'll chase me. But if I touch it, it'll give me energy, power. And, this is on a shamanic level. You don't really want to touch a living jaguar, but you don't want to run from it either. And so what happens when I touch that jaguar, when I confront what it is that's blocking me, rather than running away from it, rather than denying it? And so I would answer that question by saying, well, I can tell myself that I can turn off the television for 2 hours every night and write, or I can get up a little earlier in the morning and write. And my carpenter friend would say, well, I'll tell my clients that the extra price is not a cost. It's an investment in the future. And then the fifth question is, what actions do I take immediately? So you get these 5 questions, and I think every one of it, doesn't matter whether you're a plumber or a teacher or a carpenter or a podcast host or a parent or a student or whatever it is. These questions are relevant. What do I most want to do for the rest of my life? How can I do that in a way that will help transform the death economy to a life economy? What's stopping me? When I confront what's stopping me, how can I change my perception that allow me to move forward? And what actions do I take immediately? And I think, Krista, that those first 2 questions and the answers to those first 2 questions may stick with us for a very long time. But the last 3 are going to change frequently. Okay, I've decided I'm going to write. I've confronted that. Now the next blockage is, well, what am I going to write about? And then what's the first sentence? And the carpenter has to look at, well, how do I really implement getting into the sustainable woods? Where do I buy sustainable woods? How do I contract with someone who's going to plant trees for me? So I think it's important for people to ask these questions fairly frequently, because the last 3 especially will change.
Yeah. And I mean, that comes, of course, then also down to what we have also made to believe in a way, that we have to do a job to make a living. And this is not about a job to make a living anymore. This is really about what do I love? What do I love to do? And does it sustain a life economy? And then the other questions on top. So it in a way, what you're saying shatters the whole idea of what it means to work.
Yeah.
That's really important to understand, that we as a collective, we are in a position to do that. Most people are in a position to do that, but it's a
Yeah.
choice in the end.
Yeah. I
And
think
that will lead to fulfillment and joy, won't it, somehow?
yeah. And I think this concept that philosophers have written about throughout the ages, I think Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, a great book, addresses that when we make a decision to do something, the universe conspires to help us do it. So this idea, well, I can't be a writer because I can't make a living at it, that's just that's buying into some voice that said that. Somebody out there, I had an English teacher that criticized my writing and very, very much discouraged me from writing. And it turned out ultimately that he had some very personal reasons for doing that. But I think, and incidentally, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which was on the New York Times bestseller list for 73 weeks, it sold millions of copies now. It was rejected by 39 publishers. I got 39 rejection letters. And each time I got a rejection letter, I had to put a new perception on it. I had, in order to go out and send another one. I mean, that's extremely discouraging, it can be. But I would say to myself, well, this editor that rejected it probably had a fight with his wife at breakfast and was in a bad mood and just threw everything into the rejection. This editor probably, she walked into the office with a headache or something. She had a bad cold or something. So she just threw everything into and so you put this slant on it, and it probably was true. Maybe not the exact details, but I've since found out by getting to know a lot of editors, and I've since published with some of the biggest publishing houses in the world, that these editors are just vulnerable human beings, and most of them are frustrated writers. And some of them, if they find something that's really well written, they reject it because they don't want they're jealous. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons. So I think we have to be very, very careful not to judge ourselves based on the way other people react to us or to the things we do, and to realize that, if we just keep going with what we really love, it'll work.
Funnily enough, I was suddenly reminded, just to tell everybody, I flew out to America in I think it was in 1999, but I'm not sure when I met you the first time, to do a training with you in Florida, I think it was. And the one sentence, sorry, it's the only sentence which stuck in my mind. All the rest was not that good, you know, was follow your bliss. And there is something in that, isn't there? Which what you say right now. Follow what you are called to or what you feel called to do.
Yes. And the reason you remember that and not the other words was because the other words weren't important. Everything else revolved around. We did shamanic journeys, we did all kinds of things to help you follow your place.
Yes.
So, you know, that's, and I think that's a key to it that we can all look at is this whole idea of doing what we most want to do for the rest of our lives. And then doing whatever it takes to make that happen
Yeah.
is that's the important one. Do what you want to do. What is it you want to do for the rest of your life? What do you want to do? And I know there's people listening right now say, I don't know what I want to do. But I think when most everybody, if you deeply go into your heart, you do know what you really want to do. You're maybe afraid to admit it to yourself. And one of the reasons you might be afraid to admit it is because you're afraid it can't happen. Or maybe you're afraid it can happen and will change your life and your spouse will divorce you. Whatever will happen. So we have these fears that keep us from following, as Joseph Campbell said, to follow your bliss. We have these blockages, these jaguars standing in our road. You know, we have these fierce jaguars standing in our paths that you know, but I touch them and they give us energy. That one stays up there to keep giving me energy.
Yeah, I funnily enough wanted to come to that question. So how do you sustain all of this? And I'm
Because
not,
I love what I do.
yeah, you do a lot. You
Yes, I do a lot. I
tell us
took groups
about.
into the Amazon 3 times this past year, and also to the Mayan people of Guatemala. I flew off to Doha, Qatar a few weeks ago to be interviewed by Al Jazeera, and so on and so forth. I turn 80 next week, and you know, just keep going because I love what I do. I love doing these things, and I think that's the answer. You got to love what you do.
That's what I wanted to come to. Because besides of all of this, you also write a lot of books in between. I mean, that's just a side job. Yeah. So when you look at activism in a way, in a very wide sense, somebody said, or you said as well, the universe conspires to support you there. So I say a bit more about this because I think that is really important when we find what we really want to do, that we actually get the help and the support we need. You want to say a bit more about that? And again, I think that helps with the paradigm change we are looking at, because once people understand that, they become less dependent on what's out there at the moment.
Yes, and I would add to that, I think to do what we most want to do, but also do it in a way that makes the world a better place.
Yeah, yeah,
I do believe that's an important part of it because if what we want to do, let's say, is all we want to do is make money, it doesn't matter how we make the money, and we decide that we're going to make money by killing people, robbing banks and killing people. I don't know that the universe is going to conspire to help us with that one, frankly. And I think actually when I say that, most people who take on that kind of work, or a lot of the work people do that's let's say evil, if you want to use that term, it's just a word, and it's self-defeating because people deep in their heart they don't really want to do that.
exactly.
They don't
Exactly.
really want to do it. So I think what's important is we really look at what we most want to do. And I believe that most human beings, if not all human beings, really want to do good stuff. And I will recognize that there are sociopaths There are narcissists, and many of them rise to very high places. But what is it that they really want to do? They want accolades. They want to be respected. They want to be considered successful in their business. And if we can turn this around to tell corporations, for example, that their goal is to maximize long-term benefits, make short-term profits because they got to stay in business, but they don't have to maximize the short-term profits. They can reinvest in supporting their employees, healthcare insurance, and retirement funds, reinvesting in the communities where their businesses work, paying for educational facilities, recreational facilities, whatever. And and right now, what the sociopaths are buying into is the goal of business, which is stated. Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize by saying this: the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental cost. So the sociopaths, the narcissists who are running businesses buy into that. But if we made the mark of success for a business person to make enough short-term profits to stay in business, but also to reinvest in making the future a better place for all of our children around the world, if that became the goal, then the sociopaths and the narcissists would buy into it big time because they're looking to be the best in their fields. It's not about money for them. It's money today is, as you mentioned earlier, that's a measure of success. Let's turn that around and make the measure of success. How much are we really doing to contribute to a better future for all life?
Mm, yeah, yeah. Of course, if we can turn that around and then be praised for that and get status for that, that would
Yeah.
be great, wouldn't it? No, I get that. I get that.
And it is happening, Krista. I think it's important to recognize that we have been moving in this direction in my lifetime. Uh, and we've had a number of setbacks. Yes, Milton Friedman was one of those, and Reaganomics was one of those, and now the Trump is one of those. But out of such things, we can really find inspiration to move forward. I embrace what's going on in U.S. politics right now because although I might say I would rather it wasn't happening the way it is, I also, now that it is happening that way, look for ways to use that as leverage to move into the next phase.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. I get that. I get that. Right. We are coming, unfortunately, very quickly to the end. Is there anything else we said we would chat about, or anything else you want to bring in? So, still keeping in mind that the overall idea was about dreaming a new reality for an emerging world. You feel we left a lot out, of course.
Well, the new reality is a world that reflects what human beings have believed in for most of our 200,000 years, with the exception of perhaps the last 2 or 3 thousand, and increasingly more and more over time until more recently. The new dream is the old dream, and it's a dream of living very sustainable lives, living lives that honor the fact that we are a part of nature, not apart from nature. And that to me is the biggest difference between the indigenous people I work with today in the Amazon and us. I recognize that amongst indigenous people, there are there are there are psychos. They're crazy people as individuals. They're people. But what I really respect is that they, as cultures, understand that they are a part of nature, not apart from. And we as a culture look at ourselves as superior over. Human superiority is a very, very dangerous and destructive thing. And that's what we bought into, human superiority. We're not. And throughout most of history, human beings have realized that that's just not the case. Um, and so this new dream that this is a dream of recognizing that we are an essential part of nature. And is there's a woman shaman, an amazing woman shaman high in the Andes that I often work with, who has the wonderful name of Maria Juana. Maria Juana Yamberla. Yeah. And one time on one of the trips I took, people I was translating, somebody asked, so how do we save the world? And she laughs and says, well, the world's not in danger, but we are. And we'll take a lot of other species with us, but we're really just like so many fleas. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us all off. And then Maria Juana points up at this volcano that hovers over her house, a very sacred volcano, Imbabura. This is in the Ecuadorian Andes. And she says, you remember when that volcano was uh, covered, the whole top of it was covered with ice. It isn't anymore. Pachamama, Mother Earth, is twitching. She hasn't taken us off yet, but she's sending us a strong message. Isn't it wonderful to be alive right now when we can listen to the message and respond to it and turn things around? And that would sum up what I would say as a closing statement here. I don't know whether we have time for questions and answers and so on, but I would say that I think we should all feel blessed to be alive right now. Yes, there's huge crises and huge opportunities, huge challenges, huge opportunities. What a great time to be alive and have the opportunity to listen to Pachamama, to respond, and to take the actions that will change reality.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that is a very good closing statement. Of course, I know Imbabura. I've been there, done that. What a volcano. So Jonathan is coming in with some questions, if that's okay with you, John. Yeah?
Sure.
Bit more time? Okay.
Thanks, John. That was wonderful to hear all of that. And there's a good few questions in the chat. First one's a bit of a double-barreled one, which I'll ask, but it also comes with the gratitude. Nicola says, thank you for your perseverance with getting the book published, because it was really instrumental in changing her perspective 15 years ago. And she asks, I mean, you'd mentioned early on that the Confessions of a Hitman has now also exploring and talking about and discussing China. And her questions are kind of, what's your take on things with China, and what's your take on things with AI at the moment, please?
Well, the two good questions. Do we have 4 or 5 hours? Well, China has taken over. China in the year 2000, the United States was the #1 trading partner with 80% of the countries in the world. Today, it's China. They've taken over Africa, Latin America, and so much else. And part of it's because we fed into their hands. The United States devoted so many resources to Iraq and Afghanistan and a few other countries like that, and we just ignored most of the rest of the world. And I think right now, Xi Jinping, the Prime Minister, President of China, is very, very happy because he sees the recent executive orders of the Trump administration as being extremely helpful to China, and putting us in a difficult position with other countries that China will slip into that void. Regardless of what you think of those policies, and people may like some of those policies, and maybe they're good, but the fact of the matter is they will help China. So China and China's economic hitmen have done an amazingly great job. I taught in an MBA program in Shanghai to a lot of Chinese students some years back, and I realized when I started teaching there that they really wanted to learn what I had done that was successful and what mistakes I'd made, so they could learn from that, and they have they really. So this new book, and it incidentally just came out in China, which is fascinating to me because it's very critical of China in many respects. It talks about how successful China's been, but also how China is manipulating that success. And while the first 2 editions of the trilogy of Confessions of an Economic Hitman were published in China, my publisher and editors and I, when we wrote this most recent edition, which in English looks like this, we figured that it would never be published in China because it's so critical of China. But the fact that it has, leads one to understand that what we think of as all this all this censorship in China isn't really nearly as strong as maybe Americans want to believe. So that, if we want to compete with China, we're going to have to get a lot smarter than we are. And I think it's important also not to look at China as an enemy, but to look at China as a strong, strong competitor. And strong competitors can be very, very good for us, that's what can make us better. And AI, I think AI has the potential of really helping the world understand where it's coming from, freeing a lot of menial tasks up for people to be able to think in bigger terms. It also has the capacity to take over. And what AI doesn't concern me as a tool. It's like the old saying that you can use an axe to build a house or wreck a house. And AI is a tool. Right now, it's in the hands of a few oligarchs, Musk, of course, being the most obvious one. And he controls the world's spy satellites, many of them. He also, his Starlink internet service is in over 100 countries. A year ago, I could not get internet deep in the Amazon. This last 2 weeks ago, I was there and I could because of Starlink. But what does that mean in terms of what information is accessible to him? So I'm concerned that AI is being co-opted by a very few extremely rich, powerful people who are probably sociopaths, narcissists. I don't know what they are, but I'm not happy having them have such control. So that's something we really need to deal with. AI is not the problem. We can use it very, very creatively and constructively. The problem or the issue is who controls it.
And whether it's they're backing up that death economy rather than the life economy.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, John. There's the next question. You were talking as well about things that we can do to create a better future for all life. And one of the things that a lot of people, when we look at kind of things we can do on our everyday life, one thing that people choose to do sometimes is stop flying. And we're just wondering, there's a question in the chat, so how do you reconcile that for yourself in the work that you do, for the fact that a lot of your work does require and does involve
Excellent question.
traveling?
Excellent question. And I asked this of the 18 people that just went on the last trip with me. Before people go, I say, do a little benefit cost analysis. And you're gonna make a footprint on the planet by flying and actually by going into the jungle too, even though we go and we live very carefully there with the indigenous people, we make a footprint. There's a cost, in other words. So I ask people, before you go on this trip with me, and I do the same thing for myself, uh, is the benefits of what are going to come out of this greater than the cost? So are you people going to go back and do something that'll help create a life economy to be part of this transformation? If so, and it's going to be a bigger contribution than the cost of where you go. And of course, this is all a bit subjective, but to really explore this idea that are we creating these costs in order to benefit? So I'm very careful before I go and speak at an event, like flying across the country, so to say, to do that. How many people are going to be at the event? I don't want to go and speak to 50 people and use all that jet fuel to get there. I can do that by Zoom. But if it's going to be, or it could be 50 people who are extremely influential, in terms of sending out information, journalists or whatever, then I'll look at it differently. And so I think it's really, really important that we each look at decisions we make along the line in that context. But it's a benefit cost. And I'm an economist, so I define it as a benefit cost. But you don't need, those are just words. Is it going to end up doing more good than it does damage?
Thank you, John. I think there's probably just one last question just to squeeze in there, which I didn't write it down, but I have a feeling it was from Vay. I think I saw it, which was, it's particularly relevant now where so much of the media attention is on those leaders that are kind of backing the death economy. But you talk about those leaders that are creating and supporting the life economy, and how do we shift the focus of kind of media and attention towards those leaders that are creating and developing kind of within the life economy?
Well, we honor them, you know, I mean, in however way we can. I like to, sometimes people, you know, I teach at some or lecture at various colleges and universities. And if I'm at a school which is launching some sort of a program to change a corporation, like let's say Pepsi or Nike or whatever, uh, I encourage them to write letters and circulate them to all their social networking groups through email or text or however they do it. But it says something like, "Hey, I love your products, and I want to help you reach a larger audience, but I'm not going to buy your products anymore until you pay your workers a fair wage in Indonesia, or, clean up the pollution you're causing, or whatever. Once you've done that, I'll spread the word, and you'll become even more successful because I can reach thousands of people through all these networking. And then you send that to all your social networks, and you ask them to send it to all theirs and all theirs. And I know corporate executives, I know quite a few corporate executives who will tell me, I've got children and grandchildren. I want my company to be greener. I want my company to do a better job. But I know that if I go too far and we lose the stock price declines or we lose market share, my major shareholders will fire me and replace me with someone who only cares about market share or stock prices. And so I've got to do the best I can here. But if you can get 100,000 letters to come to me saying something like what I just said, demanding that we change, I can take those to our major stockholders and say, these are our customers. These are our clients. We've got to listen to them. I think it's really important for people to understand that we as consumers and investors and, and employees of these big corporations, we have a lot of power, especially when we come together. And social media gives us this opportunity to do that in a way that we've never had before.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, John. I'll pass you back to Krista in that case.
You get passed around. So I'm just here to say thank you from all of us. And thank you for agreeing again to be with us. And thanks from everybody here, I hope. And yeah, it was lovely to meet you again. We seem to meet every few years.
Yeah, it was a great memory of going back to those workshops in Florida. They were
Oh,
a lot of fun. They were a lot of fun, and I think they were pretty powerful too, in a way that you still remember it. But thank you, Krista, for having me on, and also thank you for all that you do. Thank you for continuing to spread this word, and that's what it's all about. And again, I would say to all the listeners, just realize that you live in a very blessed time. Honor who you are in this time you live in, and ask yourself these 5 questions. And incidentally, they're in my most recent 2 books, Touching the Jaguar and Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And if people want to find out more, go to johnperkins.org. And I encourage you to sign up for my newsletter by just putting your email in that little box. I have a new book coming out in a month or 2. It's a novel, and it's fascinating. It's called Message from Pleiades, the 7 sister stars that are up there. And it takes place in Latin America. And people will get the first chapter free if you sign up for my newsletter, and then you can pay $9 or something to get the rest of it. But yeah, it's all going to be digital, and I'm experimenting with a new form of publishing.
And also, it's of course a more live economy publishing now, digital.
We hope so. We certainly hope so. Yeah.
Okay, but this is another question. Yes, we have put all the links for you in the chat, and also if you look in the program, you will see again the links for John Perkins, his books. I think I put an Amazon link in there as well. And thank you ever so much again, and have a wonderful day.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your night.
Yeah, we're finishing now. You are our last speaker tonight. And then
It's
we
11 a.m. here, so we're beginning in your Winding down. All right. Well, enjoy, and thank you again for all that you do, Krista, and everybody that's out there involved. You know, the fact that you're involved listening to this program means that you're already doing a lot of the work. Just keep it up. More and more, more and more, deeper and deeper into bliss.
Thank you so much.